Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 141 of The Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. We are ringing in 2023, this being our first episode of the new year. And in the spirit of New Year's resolutions, I wanted to keep this episode forward focused. This is the time of year when many of us either have official New Year's resolutions or we commit to something in our lives that we feel passionately about. And so in that spirit, I wanted to share with you all my reflections and commitment to growth in 2023. For many of us in corrections, we rarely think about growth, not enough at least. Growth in terms of ourselves, our agencies, our stakeholders, or certainly growth for those we serve, our clients. This past year, I have had the honor of working with an amazing team of growth specialists led by the incomparable Sarah Lewis and her team at Penal Reform Solutions. Speaking of growth, Dr. Sarah Lewis is a senior growth consultant whose work focuses on prison, school, and penal reform in England and Wales, indeed, now internationally. She is the director of Penal Reform Solutions, a unique organization that provides consultancy, training, and programs from the perspective of those with practitioner, academic, and lived experience. Sarah designs and delivers programs as well as providing consultancy to prisons and other correctional services that want to improve and grow. Dr. Sarah Lewis is the author of the book Theraputic Correctional Relationships, a research-informed practitioner guide to developing relationships and mending relational ruptures. I have had the honor of collaborating with Sarah and her team actually on delivering some of this content, and I can attest to the fact that this is like nothing most of us are seeing in the United States. Sarah and I are looking to change that, however, so if you are a prison warden, community corrections director, or hold leadership positions in a prison or community corrections department and are looking to make big changes in 2023, listen at the conclusion of this episode for how we may be able to accommodate you. This also holds true if you are in a role involving strategic planning, training, or implementation of evidence-based practices, core correctional skills, core correctional practices. Listen up and learn of an amazing opportunity to embrace the future as far as I'm concerned. First, however, we are going to hear from the aforementioned Dr. Sarah Lewis. Sarah and I actually first connected way back during episode 33 of the Criminologist Podcast. Little did I know back then that I would someday be collaborating and, again, actually training on the content which Sarah is about to highlight for you all. So without further ado, please hear from Dr. Sarah Lewis, and I will see you all on the other side.
No problem at all. So my name is Dr. Sarah Lewis, and I am a reformer and a criminologist, really. So I kind of started my kind of academic career within psychology. I did an undergraduate in psychology and then a master's in forensic psychology. And then I kind of moved over to criminology a bit later on when I did my PhD. So in terms of my background, I started working in criminal justice back in 2005. So my first ever job was writing risk assessments and carrying out cognitive behavioural work in prisons, and it was a massive kind of culture shock for me as a young woman, I guess. And from that, I kind of made the assumption or made the conclusion maybe that prison wasn't maybe a place for rehabilitation. So I then left prisons and went into the community and continued facilitating cognitive behavioural work for about 7 years, which I absolutely loved. And then I got the opportunity to become a senior academic at the Institute of Criminal Justice Studies. So I was there for a period of time, and with that I taught penology and criminal psychology and also trained probation officers. So I had lots and lots of fantastic experiences there. And during that kind of journey, during that time I finished my PhD. So that was all about relationships within criminal justice settings. So how we can build really kind of transformative relationships and how we can kind of repair ruptures when things go wrong, as well as I guess looking at the importance of relationships within criminal justice. So I absolutely loved that and got an awful lot from that. But I also, along the way, found the literature around Norway and found out that ultimately there are these prisons in Norway that are meant to support rehabilitation and support all of those kind of ideals, I guess, of what I thought prisons should be. So I managed to kind of really blag a visit over to Norway and went to visit three key prisons that I then had the privilege of researching over a 3-year period and looking at why they were so successful in terms of their reconviction rates and in terms of their low levels of harm and their kind of staff satisfaction, really. So I did that, and then pretty much in 2016, I decided that I was going to leave academia and I was going to set up on my own. So I then became the director of Penal Reform Solutions, and that's when my journey, I guess, started kind of full force, just looking at organisational growth and culture and how we can create transformative prisons and be really kind of ambitious with that. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
So we're going to dovetail back to your experiences with the Norwegian prison systems, and obviously with Penal Reform Solutions. Let's do a deeper dive here. You mentioned your previous work with risk assessments and facilitating cognitive behavioral programs. Many of our listeners are probation officers who have experience, at least on some level, with those two aspects of the job. Can you just talk to us as your recollections carrying out those tasks and your reflections now that, again, you've gone on to get your PhD, looked at other systems, just sort of a state of the state, if you will, with correctional practitioners that rely on risk assessment and again, facilitating cognitive behavioral groups.
Yeah. Do you know what? When I was there, when I was kind of living it and carrying out those risk assessments and those programs, I believed absolutely in what I was doing. I felt that they were really valuable, and I felt that they were doing some really good work. And I still believe that to a point, absolutely. But I think what I kind of have learned since then is more around the contextual factors around growth and assistance, and how building those relationships are really important in terms of having trusting and honest conversations. I think, I was given, I think I had to do maybe 10, 12 risk assessments a month when I first started the job, and I didn't know the prisoners that I did the risk assessments of. And so with that, I kind of wonder how much I assessed them in terms of who they were. But I think the risk assessments, how they're set up, is very much looking at the deficit model. So it's looking at the kind of what works agenda, that idea of kind of rehabilitation, I guess, in real kind of broad terms, and looking at it through a risk lens. And I've really moved away from that an awful lot. We focus an awful lot on need and unmet need. And I think I learned that probably from my Norway experience, where they kind of look at need and resource and the context of an individual, who they are, who they want to be, who their families are, who's surrounding them, who are their influences, but also what are their strengths and what are their resources. And I think that's maybe something that I didn't fully appreciate when I was working within probation, just recognizing how difficult it is to desist from crime, and how hope has a massive role to play, but also trust, trusting people with your lives, trusting people with that precious information that you have around your challenges and your difficulties. I think that's something that I've certainly learned since doing that work.
We are kindred spirits in that regard. Sarah, I came up through the ranks, a disciple of the risk needs responsivity model. I train on risk assessment. I train probation officers on risk assessment and whatnot. But to your point, it's almost as if as a vocation, we've gotten a little too comfortable with it, and not, as you just articulated, really probing what's beyond those sort of cursory risk and box checking and plugging into programs without making that connection and looking at those other variables, which again lend themselves towards desistance, like hope and identity and stuff that you're not going to see in a criminogenic risk assessment. Yeah,
and I think when we create risk assessments, it's very much looking at what the person wants to get out of that. If they're having a risk assessment, let's say to go to a more open prison, then it's about, if you haven't built those relationships, it's more about what hoops do I need to jump through, and what kind of face do I need to portray to show that I am no longer a risk to society. And I kind of think we lose that depth, and we lose that real essence of an individual that we really need to kind of really conceptualize in order to fully support their desistance. And I think that's maybe some of the stuff when it becomes a tick box exercise, we remain shallow rather than think more deeply about the impact of that assessment and the impact that assessment has on an individual in terms of labeling, in terms of how they see themselves, in terms of what barriers that risk assessment can also put in place, I think sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So true. We need to be so much more holistic in our approach to the change process. Exactly. So you then segued a little bit into some implementation work. Talk to us a little bit about, I've seen on your resume, if you will, that you served as a lean consultant. So I've got some project management background. Is that what that refers to? Tell us about your work as a lean consultant.
Yeah, so I was seconded with Hampshire Probation. So I was seconded to be a lean consultant across Hampshire. And I think what that was really looking at is how we can be smarter. I think in light of the massive amount of bureaucracy and the amount of, I guess, demand that was expected at that time within probation, it was about how can we add value to the work that we're doing? How can we create better flow in our processes? The classic waste for me is about waiting, that we wait for responses and we wait for all these different things to happen. It slows down a process. So we looked very much at the environment, setting up your environment, so setting up your organization in a way that was really focused on having the things close to you that you use every day and almost knowing where placed things were. So you wouldn't waste time looking for things, or you wouldn't waste time walking, miles and miles to find a photocopier or dealing with, not having a telephone on your desk and all these kind of things. So it was quite a kind of practical look at how we could be smarter, but also I think what I really learned from being a lean consultant is one of the principles of lean consultancy is go and see. So go and see what the issues are, really get an understanding of what that is as a manager, but also strive for perfection. And I think we don't do that enough, I think, within criminal justice. I think we very much think, it's good enough and it's really reactive and we have to get things done. But I think if we strive to perfection, then with that we can create something that is out of the ordinary and something that's so much bigger than maybe just doing a good enough job. Then maybe we kind of got stuck in over the years in light of the culture that I guess has emerged across kind of criminal justice, I guess, globally. So I learned an awful lot from it, but I think for me it was just about supporting people in thinking how they could work effectively and how they could maintain hope through the valuable work that they did, rather than the kind of endless meetings or meaningless stuff that they were being asked to do.
Mm-hmm. So along those lines, I'm of the opinion that the biggest hurdle we face right now in the world of evidence-based practices is the struggle with implementation. To what degree is that an issue in the UK?
Yeah, I think it remains a really challenging issue. And I think having worked in academia and very much living in that kind of ivory tower, I think we're very comfortable with going to conferences and talking with other academics, or trying to, punch high with getting publications in those kind of top academic journals. And I think we lose some of that really valuable knowledge that we could really implement onto the ground. So what was beautiful, I guess, about setting up on your own is that you can design your own job almost. So I think part of our work is all about how do you apply that practically? What does procedural justice look like, or what does desistance look like, and supporting desistance look like on a really practical, everyday level? And we did that. We ran a pilot at a prison, and during that time we brought academics into the prison. So I held conferences within the prison with prisoners and with staff to talk about some of the kind of cutting edge knowledge that was out there. We did a number of collaborations with academics, so again involving them in this kind of transformative journey, really. And also it works the other way around. So it's about me getting out there, lecturing. It's me getting out there, connecting with people and really valuing the knowledge that we have, but bringing it down to the ground, whether that's through our internship program and getting kind of criminology students engaged at an early stage in their kind of academic career to really be part of that change process. So I think there's loads of work that needs to happen there. I think we know an awful lot of the answers in terms of how to support desistance and how to implement change and what a safe environment looks like. But I think the problem is that there is this real challenge in terms of where do you start and what does it look like on a day-to-day practice from the minute you open someone's door in a prison to the minute you lock them up in the evenings. What does growth look like, and what does kind of effective practice look like based on evidence and based on what we know, pretty comprehensively, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, as you noted, we know what works. I mean, to a degree, we know how we can get some pretty decent effect sizes when it comes to reductions in recidivism, but it's convincing the practitioner that that's the pathway to take. And I get frustrated because, again, knowing that we know the answer, but due to implementation struggles and cultural, the culture of an agency might be, for example, more containment, surveillance, law enforcement. I scratch my head sometimes and think, if our stakeholders knew all we knew, again, as far as whether it's the risk need responsivity model or the emerging desistance theories, but that we're just not doing it, there would be this crazy outrage. But I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the plan is to create safer environments, isn't it, in the community? And, I think that I've got a fantastic friend of mine who's Hungarian, who was a governor of a prison, and he always says, who do we want our children to meet on the streets? Do we want them to meet, fantastic kind of returning citizens, or do we want to meet people that have got mental health issues or problems, with coping or aggression or whatever it may be? And I think it's about why we do it, isn't it? There's so much effective practice out there, and I think it's just about how can we do it? Because we have a responsibility. I feel that we have a responsibility. If we're going to be academics, then we have a responsibility to share that knowledge rather than maybe wait for a prison to knock on our office door and say, we kind of need a bit of help because we've got a massive amount of self-harm or we've got a massive amount of suicide in our prisons. I think sometimes, taking on that responsibility as academics, I think is something that also needs to happen.
100%. So you mentioned you made the leap to academia. What prompted that to go from probation officer to pursue academia, your PhD?
Yeah, it's quite ironic, really, because the reason I joined academia and the reason I kind of exited it was basically due to people that I worked with. So essentially, people that are offended. So I remember I was doing a cognitive behavioural program, and I think we were in the tea break, and I was contemplating applying for this job as a senior academic, and kind of thinking, oh, do I really want to do this? And I remember walking out of the prison back in 2006 and saying, do you know what, when I have a greater amount of legitimacy, I'm going to come back and I'm going to try and make things better. And I think those, we had this cup of tea and these guys were like, I said, oh, I love this job and I really want to do it, but there's this opportunity here, and what do you think, guys? And I just remember them saying, well, it's a no-brainer, Sarah. You just got to go for it, because you've got to make a bigger impact, and you're wasted here. You could really influence people. So I on the basis of that advice, I went for the job, and with that, I was so lucky to get it, really, in terms of that, and exactly the same happened in Norway. So I was getting to the end of the project, and on my last day in Norway, I spoke to three separate prisoners. And they all came in. I didn't know them, hadn't known them, and I was talking to them about Norway and their experiences of Halden prison. And all three of them said independently, he said, you're a bit wasted in academia. Surely you need to get back into the ground and you need to start making a big influence, what's wrong with you? And on that basis alone, I resigned from pretty much the day I got back from Norway and haven't looked back since. So yeah, I pretty much have a lot to say for those guys that maybe gave me that advice, and started to get me thinking more ambitiously, I guess, about what I wanted to do, and obviously they saw that my commitment was there and my drive was there to make things better. So yeah, that was why I made the leap, really.
So I promised we'd come back to it, and you were just alluding to it. So share with us some of those experiences with the Norwegian prison system and how that's really impacted you as far as penal reform solutions and all the other great work you do, Sarah. Yeah,
I mean, it's been instrumental. And I remember the first time I stepped foot on Bastoy prison, which is an island prison, 115 prisoners there, and no keys, no real locks, no harm, no violence. And I kind of just remember feeling that and thinking, this is unbelievable. You couldn't see prisoners, you couldn't see the prison, you couldn't see all of those things that were characteristic to how I saw the kind of Victorian prisons that I'd worked in previously. And so I kind of said to the governor, do you know what, can I come back and do some research? And he said, yeah, right, that's great, which is amazing when you think about kind of just generally getting a research project off the ground. But I went there as a mum. I had two children at home. My husband looked after those kids, and it was the first time I pre-travelled on my own. It was the first time I was in a foreign country on my own. Because it was all around co-creating the design and the methodology and basically, doing kind of grounded theory almost within that work, I didn't even know what the project was going to look like on day one. So as you can imagine, it was just completely overwhelming. And yet I had 4 guys that were recruited, that were prisoners, that were on the research team. I had 2 members of staff. And together we created this project of capturing what the things that people valued through photography. So doing photo essay research. So we gave guys cameras and we gave the staff cameras, and we said, okay, capture in a photo what it is that you value and tell us why that is. And it was just from that minute on, it was just the most inspiring place. And I remember sitting on Bastoy Island and looking out over the water and just thinking, this is what I want to do. I want to use this stuff. This is my responsibility to use this stuff to try and speak to people and try and connect people up and to make things better. So it was, we talk a lot about self-actualization and, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all that kind of stuff. And I think at that moment I knew that's what I want to do, and I want to lead that, and I want to focus on that for essentially, the rest of my life, really. So Norway had a massive impact on me in so many levels, really, both personally and professionally.
You were telling that story of how you pulled up and you couldn't see the prison. Ironically, I thought to myself, so we're here in Minnesota where we have a famous maximum security prison, Oak Park Heights. It's been featured on the Discovery Channel, et cetera, et cetera. But the entire prison is built underground. So wow. when you pull into the parking lot, you think you're pulling into your dentist office. You don't see anything, and then you take elevators down, and the higher risk of the prisoner, the deeper into the bowels of the prison they're housed. So when you said, I pulled up and I couldn't see the prison, I thought, yeah, we have a prison like that too, but it's on the other end of the spectrum of why you can't see the prison.
My word, that's mad. That's absolutely, that's mad. And you've got to think, if we were doing anything regarding growth, if we were thinking about just generally rehabilitation, whether that's therapy or, if we suffered from mental health issues, how would you best grow an individual? And I kind of think, would you grow them in a forest where they felt safe with trusting relationships, or would you grow them underground? Do you know what I mean? Like, would you grow them in such a difficult environment? And I think it is as simple as that sometimes. It is about what conditions do we want to create that is going to transform people and also the well-being of staff, like just looking at the well-being of staff is as important because they're also part of the community. So, yeah, it still baffles me in many ways.
So how do you confront, and I'm sure people maybe not people listening, not my awesome audience, but others out there might think, because again, I've been exposed to the Norwegian prison system, and I've read articles and watched YouTube videos and whatnot. But, the layperson or the individual on the street would say, well, why would you set up a prison like a hotel? It's just, for many, it just strikes as so counterintuitive that who think we have to punish people into behavioral norms. How do you address that? Again, that sort of pushback of you're being sort of a hug-a-thug and just you're so soft on folks that surely this can't work.
Yeah. So often do I get given this question, as you can imagine, Joe. But I think there's so much there. I think firstly there is this myth that desistance is easy, and it's not. It's the most difficult thing. If you were asked to completely transform the people that are around you, the way in which you think, the way in which you express your emotions, all of that, I think is such a difficult thing to do. And then you think about the amount of trauma and mental health and literacy needs and all these things that we know are inherent to the people that generally turn up in prisons. I kind of think it makes sense, for me, it makes sense that we need to start thinking about, in light of all of these inequalities, we need to start thinking about levelling the playing field sometimes. And it does go back to that, who do we want to, as our neighbour, who do we want to meet on the street? I think if we create an environment where people feel safe, then with that, people are going to be honest about the issues that they have, and they're going to be able to reflect on the things that they've done. And by no means is that behaviour acceptable in terms of the crimes that they've committed, but it does not define them as individuals. And I think there's so much more to a prisoner than that crime. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much kind of untapped talent or unutilised resource there that could really contribute to our society and make it a safer place, So I think when I ask the question, a lot of people say, how can it be a deterrent? When you create these holiday camps and you create these hotels, how can it be a deterrent? And I remember asking a senior advisor that very question, saying, this is just lovely. Surely people will just want to come back here, for food and for a holiday, it just seems to be that place. And he said very clearly and very kind of bluntly, really, he said, never underestimate what it feels like to lose your freedom. And I think, COVID's given us that little taste, isn't it? In terms of, here we've had a lockdown where you haven't been able to see your family, you haven't been able to connect with people. And I think that's a 1% version of what it feels like to lose our freedom and to be controlled on some kind of level. And I kind of think if you've lost everything, if you lost that freedom, Bastoy prison may look like a holiday camp, but it is still a painful place. Because people do not have those connections with those that they love. They don't have that feeling of pride when they're bringing in money and protecting their families and supporting them. I think all of those things, we need to think about it in a much more broader perspective, maybe. And just go back to that idea of, if you plant a seed, how do you want it to grow? You have to water it. You have to give it good soil. If you give it a toxic environment that's not conducive to growth, then people will not grow. They will socially die, essentially. So I think nature teaches us an awful lot, and I think Norway certainly taught me that, I would say. But that would be my response, I guess.
Yeah, and as to your point about the lack of freedom, I think that's arguably one of the biggest misconceptions that, again, the public has about incarceration is it's the lack of freedom. That's the, I don't even want to call it a deterrent, but that's the pain, is the lack of freedom. And if you talk to incarcerated individuals, they'll say that it's not spending Christmas with my family. It's missing another birthday of my child. It's, like you said, not having the connections. It's the lack of freedom. We don't need to punish beyond that. I had our mutual connection, David, on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he said the same thing. It's the lack of freedom. You don't need to pile on beyond that. And as you said, thanks to our friend COVID, we're all sort of getting a very, very, very minuscule taste of that. But, yeah, that's the trick. And again, as you said, who do you want as your neighbor? I don't know what the statistics are in the UK or in Europe for that matter, but I always tell individuals here in the United States, 95% of everybody who's incarcerated today is going to get out eventually. Who do you want released? It's not like you see in the movies where people get locked up and out of sight, out of mind. They're all coming back. Who do you want as your neighbor, as your coworker, etc.? Yeah,
very true. I think there's so much there, isn't there? But I think hope is such a big thing as well. I think, by creating hope and creating hopeful environments, and with that, people will start thinking about that they can be a different person, they can live a better life. And I think when you lose hope in an environment, then with that, that's when the harm starts taking place, and that's when people end their lives, and that's when you start experiencing all the things that we kind of tend to associate with prisons, really. So yeah, it's challenging.
Mm-hmm. So now you are the director of Penal Reform Solutions. Let's dive into that, Sarah.
Yeah, so I love my job. I've been here since 2016, and I think, that's the great thing, I guess, about setting up a company, is that you get to choose and kind of carve out what you love about everything in your work, and then make it a reality, really. But the main things we focus on is just how organizational growth, so how we can support people in creating a kind of more humane, a more trusting, a more safe environment within their work, so that they feel better, and we get all the fruits that come with that, really. So we work in prisons, we work in probation, we work with charities. So basically any organisation that kind of requires that in some senses, that are maybe experiencing some of that kind of chaos or reactive nature to things, or difficulties, particularly, let's say, around retention of staff or high levels of harm, I guess. So we kind of go in, and when I say we've got a collection of people that work for us. So you had the pleasure of meeting lovely David, who's on the team, and we've got about 8 former prisoners that work for us. So they're either mentors, or they work within our marketing kind of work, or they support us in developing programs to support assistance in different ways within prison environment. And we work alongside, whether that's former practitioners, so probation practitioners, or prison officers. We very much love the idea of that kind of multidisciplinary work, so that we can really learn off one another and get, create a really kind of critical space, really, where we can get the best response, really, that kind of focuses on sustainability. So it's about the long game rather than maybe this kind of plaster mentality, this microwave solutions of like, let's just do some quick wins and not maybe focus on the bigger picture. So we've developed training for practitioners that work with individuals that have maybe got complex needs or come from marginalised backgrounds. We do a number of different kind of innovative projects. We do some preventative stuff. So 3 of the guys that I met in prison, they are currently on our books to do some schoolwork, to go into schools and talk about prison, and talk about their experiences of prison and in being involved in gangs and their kind of experience of violence, really. So we focus on the kind of preventative stuff as well as the kind of sustainability stuff, really. And I love it. I absolutely love it. It's just brilliant.
Find a job you love and you'll never work a day the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't plan to retire ever.
So now, from Penal Reform Solutions, you found the Growth Alliance, or explain the relationship between those two entities?
Yeah, so when I started PRS, I guess for me, I kind of thought, I'm going to be like Elizabeth Fry, and I'm going to go from prison to prison and make a difference. And I kind of experienced or reflected quite quickly that wasn't going to I wasn't going to have enough time to do that in terms of the impact I guess I wanted to make. So the Growth Alliance started last year, and we have about 6 founding members that were also on board with it, really. And it came about, again, through a real kind of informal conversation with someone who had the same kind of passion for more of a social movement. So it was more around how we can connect together and make a collective impact, rather than just all of us working in our silos and meeting our own targets and trying hard to make criminal justice a kind of safer and less harmful place, really. So the Growth Alliance is open to anyone. Anyone can join, and with that, pre-COVID, we were doing kind of regular events and trying hard to, I guess, build a kind of collaborative force. I kind of talk a little bit about it like the Avengers. We're trying to find Avengers in the world that want to be on board, and we're going to smash Thanos, which essentially represents, I guess, that kind of lack of humanity and all that kind of harm that we kind of experience, really. So it's all about getting together. It's all about coming together to make a bigger impact. That's what the Growth Alliance is all about.
I love the Avengers analogy. So you've got some YouTube videos under the Growth Alliance. That's another great way for folks to hear about the work you do. I am a subscriber. I will encourage my listeners to subscribe as well, but give us the lowdown on those videos in what, again, folks might expect to see when they tune in.
Yeah, so I think they come from lots of different places, really. So we've got a number of our founding members that are doing presentations about some of the work that they're doing in England. So whether that's around training or whether it's around, workshops that they're doing, or creative kind of adventures that people are up to. So there's a number of, I guess, videos around that, and also some videos just around some of my Norway stuff and the reasons why I kind of do what I do, what we kind of do at PRS, really. So we're planning on certainly building that a lot over the next year, really, in terms of just having a bit more of a kind of presence on our YouTube channel, and just trying to get different people to articulate why they want to be part of the Alliance, really. But yeah, it started last year, and we're still in the early days and thinking about how best to move forward with it. But that's the plan. It's about, a place where people can be inspired. That was the kind of one of the main reasons we did it. It was about hope. It was about recognizing that there's a lot of people out there that work tirelessly and are going through some really challenging kind of work experiences that are essentially quite traumatic, and we wanted to kind of reach out and ultimately kind of inject a bit of hope there. So that was one of our mission statements, really, with the Alliance. So that's what our videos are kind of centered on.
Yeah, I'll leave a link to at least your initial video in the episode description of this podcast, so our listeners can follow your channel as well. And then let's talk about your podcast, Growth Uncut. What can our listeners expect to hear when they tune into Growth Uncut?
Yeah, so Growth Uncut came mainly due to COVID, really. And I think just me feeling powerless that I couldn't get back into prisons, and I couldn't maybe help in that way. So I kind of thought, how else could I maybe reach different people? So Growth Uncut is basically about talking to different people from around the world that believe in social justice and humanity and social good, really. And I've learned so much from it. In some senses, it was almost like who are my heroes? Who would I love to speak to? Even though maybe being slightly petrified of speaking to some of the incredible kind of heroes of mine, like Shad Maroon or Fergus McNeil, and just getting them to speak about growth and talk about, how they conceptualize growth, what their challenges have been, what they've learned from those challenges, but also what inspires them and stuff around their relationships, which I think is really important. So, I talked a little bit about that kind of ivory tower. I kind of think in some senses Growth Uncuts this kind of bridge downwards to the ground, so that people can really access, what academics are thinking, I guess, within that arena, but also bridges sideways. So we've got some of the guys from my team that have taken part in Growth Uncut, so former prisoners. We've got a Norwegian governor, so that was last week's podcast. So he talked about his experiences of governing Bastoy. So it's just, again, links very closely with our connection campaign. So it's all about connecting people. It's all about raising awareness and highlighting, I guess, a more tolerant perspective to criminal justice, but also ensuring that that justice is done. That's important too. So Growth Uncut came from that, really. Just people that I would love to have a chat with, really, and it's kind of evolved from there. So our next series, we've been doing this series, which has been quite a long series, really. So we've got about 20 episodes within this series, which is just talking about growth more generally. And then the next series is going to be focusing on young people and how they experience growth and what they need in order to grow as individuals, and then getting some kind of commentary from education and from practitioners that work within the field, and listening to some of the challenges that they kind of face. So that's on the horizon.
Well, I look forward to that next chapter. I'm binging my way through your back episodes as we speak.
Great.
Like I said, Sarah, I will link your website, Penal Reform Solutions, your Growth Alliance YouTube video in the show description of this episode. So my listeners, if they want to go down those rabbit holes, which they should, they can find it all right there in the show description.
Fantastic.
Sarah, it thrills me when I get to meet kindred spirits from around the world, and you are certainly one of them. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Joe.
Yeah, I hope you'll come back someday.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Take care, Sarah. Be well.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. And little did I know it at that time, but Sarah and I would go on to meet in Barcelona, where we would train together in Iwan Dernescu's International Training School on core correctional skills. And in addition to that opportunity, I have been able to deliver Sarah's content on the international stage. So I can again attest to the efficacy of Sarah's philosophy on growth, and in particular her therapeutic correctional relationships model, which again is really like nothing we're seeing in the United States. Sarah and I would like to change that. However, again, if you are a prison warden or director of a community corrections agency, or are in a decision-making capacity, perhaps as a strategic planner, a trainer, an implementation specialist in a corrections agency, I encourage you to reach out to me or Sarah to find out how we can help you with this amazing approach to changing the way we do business in corrections, quite frankly. You can contact me at the Criminologist Podcast at gmail.com for information on even having an informal conversation with me and or Sarah about this dynamic security approach, this relationship-based approach to doing business in corrections, which if you listen to this podcast, you know I'm all about desistance. Desistance is woven throughout Sarah's program. Trust me, you're really going to want to check this out. Speaking of checking things out, I'm excited to announce that next week I will be interviewing Veronica Cunningham. Veronica is the executive director of the American Probation and Parole Association. You're going to want to circle your calendars for this one, folks. A very special episode of The Criminologist next week when I interview Veronica Cunningham. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, implementation, program design, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me or Sarah Lewis on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. Merchandise is now available. If you are interested, visit us at the Paragon Group, LLC.com. Look for the tab entitled Shop. You'll find all sorts of information on how to secure your very own criminologist coffee mug, refrigerator magnet, or your very own criminologist pen. And if you believe in what we're doing on the program, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us. Refrigerator magnet or pen for the home or office. Someone really wants some merchandise.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.